You've probably seen the headlines. A recent UN report makes one of the most serious accusations possible under international law: genocide. So today, we're going to get past those headlines and do a deep dive into the legal analysis of that report. We're going to break down exactly how this UN commission came to its conclusion about the events in Gaza. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we can't just jump to the end. We've got to follow the legal breadcrumbs, so to speak. We'll start with what this investigation was even about. Then we'll unpack the legal definition of genocide. It's super specific. After that, we'll look at the 4 acts the report examines, tackle the really tough question of intent, and then we'll get to the commission's final conclusion. All right, first things first, where is this information actually coming from? Well, we're looking at a specific document, a conference room paper from the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry. And its job, its mandate, was very, very specific: to analyze Israel's actions in Gaza since October 2023 through the lens of the Genocide Convention.
And I want to be really clear about something here. Our goal today isn't to debate the conflict itself. What we are doing is breaking down the legal process this report used. Think of it like this. We're looking at the blueprint of their argument, how this UN body built its case, and why it reached the conclusions it did.
So before the commission could even think about looking at evidence, they had to lay down the law. Literally. They start by defining exactly what genocide means from a legal standpoint. This is the foundation for everything that follows. Okay, this is absolutely crucial. To prove genocide in a court of law, you need 2 key ingredients. First, you need the physical act itself, the what. The legal term for this is actus reus. But that's not enough. You also need the specific intent to destroy a group, the why. And that's called dolus specialis. Both have to be there.
So let's talk about that first ingredient, the actus reus, or the physical acts. The report hones in on 4 specific types of acts that are listed right in the Genocide Convention. The commission is basically going through a checklist, looking for evidence of these things happening on a wide scale.
And here's the second and honestly much trickier ingredient: the mental element, the dolus specialis. See, it's not enough to just show that these terrible things happened. The report has to try and prove they were done with the specific goal of destroying the group. In this case, that group is the Palestinian people, who are recognized as a protected group under the convention.
Okay, so now we have our legal framework, right? The 2-part test. Now, let's dive into how the report actually applies this framework to the facts it gathered on the ground. We'll start with those 4 prohibited acts. The first act on that checklist is killing members of the group, and the report starts with a truly staggering number. According to their findings, during the period they reviewed, just over 60,000 Palestinians were killed. But the commission argues that the number alone doesn't tell the whole story. What really matters is how these deaths occurred. The report goes into detail, pointing to the use of massive bombs in crowded city blocks, attacks on places that are supposed to be safe, like homes and hospitals, and even, they allege, the targeting of civilians who are trying to evacuate or just get humanitarian aid. All right, let's move on to the second act, causing serious bodily or mental harm. And again, the report starts with a huge number. In terms of physical injuries, it documents over 146,000 people injured within its timeframe. Now, harm can mean a lot of things, right? So the report breaks it down. It talks about the purely physical, like amputations. Over 1,000 children had amputations by just November of 2023. It also details the severe mental trauma of displacement and loss. And it includes reports of torture and sexual violence against detainees, and even things you might not think of, like the long-term health problems from breathing in dust from all the rubble.
Okay, number 3. This one's a bit of a mouthful. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. What does that mean? Basically, making it impossible for people to survive. And to show this, the report points to the incredible scale of destruction to the very buildings and infrastructure people need for daily life. Just look at these numbers. And the report says this wasn't random. It argues these impossible conditions were created by a combination of things: a total siege blocking food, water, and fuel, the specific destruction of food sources like bakeries, systematic attacks on the healthcare system, and pushing millions of people from their homes into what the report calls inhumane conditions. Now, for the 4th and final act the report looks at, imposing measures intended to prevent births. This is a really specific one, and the report's analysis focuses on a single powerful event,
the shelling of the Al-Basma IVF clinic, which was the largest fertility center in Gaza. And the report really underscores the finality of this attack. You have to think about what was lost. Roughly 5,000 embryos, sperm samples, and unfertilized eggs were destroyed. For hundreds of families, that was it. That was the end of their dream of having children.
Okay, so at this point, the report has laid out its case for the 4 physical acts, the actus reus. But remember our 2-part test? That's only half the story. Now we get to what's often the hardest part to prove, the specific intent, the dolus specialis. So how do you prove what someone was thinking? The report tries to do it in 2 ways. First, it looks at direct evidence, things like public statements from Israeli officials. But it also looks at indirect evidence, which is all about patterns. The idea is that you look at a pattern of conduct that is so consistent that, the commission says, the only reasonable inference you can draw is genocidal intent.
Let's talk about direct evidence first. The commission points to a lot of official statements. This one, for example, from Israel's defense minister on October 9, 2023, is one of the central pieces of evidence the report analyzes to make its case on intent. And for that indirect evidence, the report says, look, when you step back and connect the dots, a pattern starts to emerge. They point to the siege that withholds basic necessities. They point to the systematic attacks on hospitals, the destruction of cultural sites, and a use of force that, according to their sources, resulted in a civilian death rate of 83%. The argument is that altogether, this points to something beyond just military objectives. So the commission has laid out all its evidence for the physical acts, for the specific intent. So after all of that, what was the bottom line? Where did they land? The report's final conclusion is direct. It states that, in its view, both the physical acts, the actus reus, and the specific intent, the dolus specialis, for the crime of genocide have been established. Based on its investigation, the commission finds that Israeli authorities intended to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as a group. And that conclusion brings us right to the heart of the issue, doesn't it? You have this legal finding from a UN commission, but it exists in the middle of a deeply complex, incredibly raw, and ongoing political and military reality. It really leaves us with a huge question. When you have law, politics, and armed conflict colliding with this much force, what on earth comes next?